Talk It Over. I'm so thankful that you're joining me for a conversation about one of the best stories in all of Scripture. This Take Heart series is about trying to recognize that Jesus is in every situation and learning to recognize that he's there. And what happens, Jesus says, is that we take heart. We discover that he has overcome the world. Now, today, specifically, I want you to think about this idea, and it's one that you know well. Many people don't see what God is doing. They only see the pessimistic things that are going on in the world, and they say, man, the famous line is, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, right? And some people live in that view, that worldview, and they don't see that God promises, and because God promises, we know it to be true, that God is over every situation, even the worst situations, that God is going to bring good things out, even though he doesn't make bad things happen. It's not who God is, and God doesn't do bad things, but God takes the bad things, and God makes good from that. He makes good things happen. And so that is telling us that God is doing good things everywhere. We just don't see it. The question I want you to talk about, and if this is your first time for Talk It Over, what you do is you pause it when you see a question, or you pause it when you see a scripture, and then you either discuss it if you're with a group of people, or you can journal. Use this as a time of self-reflection and spiritual growth. So, take time, answer this question in a paragraph form or longer if you want, and then resume this conversation with me. So the first question is, do you see what God is doing in the world around you? Okay, this story is a story about Jesus traveling with his disciples. The disciples see a blind man on the side of the road who has been born blind. So he's been blind his whole entire life. And they say to Jesus, they're really curious, who caused this man to be born blind? Was it the parents because of their sin, they said, or the blind man's sin? And Jesus says, you guys, your theology is all backwards. You don't even understand. He says, that's ridiculous that you would ever consider that. He says, neither the man was born blind because of his sin or his parents' sin, but Jesus says this bad thing is something that God is going to bring good out of. At that moment, Jesus spits into the dirt, makes mud, and then puts the mud on the eyes of the man born blind, and then the man born blind is told by Jesus to go and wash in the pool of Siloam in Shalom, and he washes his eyes at that point. Jesus isn't around anymore, and he can see. The whole town is in an uproar because they can't believe what they saw. They don't believe it. They just don't believe it. So they come up with all these claims, and I want you to read the scripture ahead of it if you want, but some claim that he's a lookalike. It's not really the guy. Then the parents get brought in, and they're like, is this really the guy? And they're like, that's the guy because we know him because he's our kid. And then they actually say, okay, well, now tell us. They're talking to the man born blind. Tell us what you experienced. He does. They're just in disbelief. They're pushing back. And that's when this scripture happens. Read it in John 9, verse 30 through 34. And as you read it, pause the video, but as you read it, underline words that stand out to you, sentences, and think about the conversation that is taking place. And we'll resume this conversation here. Okay, so what I pulled out of it when I was reading scripture is this. Number one way for us to see Jesus better, and that's what our conversation is about today, is engage in truthful conversation with others. You know what? You may think that people who challenge your worldview or challenge your faith are not good for you to engage in conversation with. Actually, they will cause you to be more passionate about what you believe and to grow in your faith. And so that is a good thing. Here's a question for you. What healing have you personally experienced or witnessed in your life? Okay, so it's either healing that you've had happen in your life or one that you've witnessed. And boy, if you're in a group, you're going to share this and great conversations are going to take place. And if you're alone, what a great journaling opportunity. So answer that question and we'll get into the scripture. Okay, the next scripture is John 9, verse 35 through 38. Again, circle stuff, read it, study that scripture, and then we'll get back into it. Okay, second thing that we learned from this scripture about how to see Jesus better is that we should recognize that we've already seen Jesus. Notice that the blind man, he didn't know it, but he'd already seen Jesus and that he'd already been healed by Jesus, that Jesus has already been speaking to us and healing us. Think about that. Here's a question for you. Have you ever felt Jesus has visited you without knowing it? I smile when I ask this question because I love the answers. And of course, it's a mystery, isn't it? But what a fun way to learn about other people and also just fun in your life to just really reflect, even if you're not sure about it, why don't you speculate? Why don't you think, you know what? Where has Jesus been? And try to think about those places where Jesus has that you can see that Jesus has been in your life. Why? Because we know that he's always been there. But what times do you think Jesus has visited you without you knowing it? Third thing that we can learn from our scripture today about how to better see Jesus is tell Jesus that your heart is open. The blind man says to Jesus, if you look at the scripture, he says, I want to believe in him. He doesn't even know he's talking to Jesus. And then tell him you want to believe in him, just like the blind man. And guess what Jesus says? He says, you know what? I'm here. And that man sees Jesus for the first time. That's the real transformation, the moment of sight for that blind man. Here's a question for you. Have you ever told Jesus your heart is open to him? Okay. What happened? Or what is still happening? Or maybe even what do you think or hope will happen? Now, read the scripture, John 9:39 through 41. It's our last scripture today. Okay, fourth thing we learned about how to better see Jesus. I love this. I hope this is helping you. It helps me a lot. Is to recognize your blindness and your need for Jesus to help you see. Question for you. What experiences and expertise have caused blindness in your life? Sometimes people say, hey, you know what? I've seen it all. I've done it all. Guess what? Jesus says you'll never see anything more and you'll never do anything more if you have that perspective and attitude in life. You got to say, you know what? I have more to learn and I am not all that. There's so much more that I have not yet been. Okay? And so my question is for you. Think about the expertise, the ways that you think that you have it all together, or experiences that have caused blindness in your life. And moreover, try to reflect on how. How have they caused blindness? That's it. That's our Take Heart conversation for today. I'm so thankful that I got to spend this time with you. We're going to have a couple more Take Heart conversations. We are going to have Easter coming up. And then after that Easter, we are going to jump into a new series that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. But enjoy this time. Start to look for Jesus. Start to use these 4 principles and practices in your life. And I pray that you really think about how God's been speaking to you through this conversation today. Remember, we are here for you. Let us know how we can help and walk alongside you in this journey. God bless. Take care.